Okay, good evening. Good evening. I'm Scott Atlas. I want to welcome everyone to the Global Liberty Institute's annual International Symposium and Rising Leaders Summit. This is our third year doing this here, and this year our meeting is called Alliances and Freedom in the Trump Era. Thrilled to see so many friends and new people, and of course our outstanding young people that we refer to as rising leaders. Some of them are already leaders, they've already risen already. But I'll give a few remarks to set the scene for what we're talking about today. I recently spoke in London at Jordan Peterson's ARC conference, which is a growing international forum for leaders and citizens who believe in the value of Western civilization, especially freedom. And I was asked to speak on the subject of restoring institutions. But I asked the audience when I got up, why are we here at this very moment in history finally awakened to the need to restore institutions? Because after all, for decades, we have seen institutions fail. We've seen all over the world incompetent and wasteful governments, editorialized and dishonest journalism, agenda-driven schools and universities. And the answer to me was obvious. It was something that had to affect everyone very personally to wake them up, and that was COVID. That was the pandemic, the gross mismanagement of the pandemic that really exposed rather than created institutional failure. And in my view, it is the most tragic, the most unethical breakdown of leadership of free societies in our lifetimes. More than exposing the massive incompetence by bureaucrats, the fundamental lack of critical thinking, we saw the disappearance of society's moral and ethical compass, shifting the burden of a pandemic to poor people, using our own children to shield ourselves by injecting experimental drugs into them. This lack of a moral and ethical compass was so pervasive that now I think we've lost trust, rightfully so, in institutions, in leadership, and sadly among our fellow citizens. And this trust is really essential to the function of any diverse free society. But that awakening to this is the silver lining. Across the world for years, like I've mentioned, we've witnessed aggressive moves away from individual and economic freedom. These are issues that should not be political. Policies that centralize power at the expense of individual liberty have gained momentum, many prompted by perceived failings of capitalism and a rising concern about inequality. This idea has been facilitated by decades of educating young people with what I think has been a single biased curriculum extolling false principles counter to much history. At the same time, media neutrality and freedom of speech are now under pressure. This has severely damaged the environment that is essential for all open debate and civil discourse. Mainstream and social media, dominated by a single viewpoint, has engaged in implicit, and now we see at times explicit censorship, things that we never thought we would see in our lifetimes. This dangerous trend threatens the free exchange of ideas, not only to finding truth, but to urgently needed policy solutions. Disruption, of course, is sorely needed, and America reacted by electing the most disruptive leader in modern political history, Donald Trump. Today in the US, many are basking in this resounding victory. It's a very divided society, I think, as everyone here knows. And I say it's a resounding victory because he didn't just win the way that the elections are determined, the state-by-state electoral vote. He won the popular vote, and he won 90% of counties in the country. So no matter what the media says, it was a resounding victory. But more importantly, it is an undeniable repudiation of the centralization of power that we've seen, but also of the social policies that had gained hold in the US, many of which are contrary to simple common sense. In addition, it is a much-needed slap back at media propaganda and at cancel culture. this is the censorship. It's not just totally stopping someone from speaking, it's making people afraid to speak. The issue, though, is despite the election, most solutions come from individuals, not from government. And ultimately, it is individuals, not institutions, who will save freedom. And that is the basis for what I and my colleague Josh Rauh did by co-founding the Global Liberty Institute a couple of years ago. GLI is an independent, international, and nonpartisan initiative for promoting individual and economic liberty and the free exchange of ideas. The core of GLI is what we call the Rising Leaders Program. And in fact, we have recently modified our name so we will now more clearly reflect our core objective, and we are calling ourselves the GLI Liberty Network. We are on a mission at the GLI Liberty Network, and that mission is to secure the future of liberty. We empower and propel the careers of bold young leaders who stand for these values of liberty, economic freedom, and most importantly, free speech. We are dedicated to identifying and mentoring young rising stars in early private sector, early public sector careers, in the media, and in the arts, to educate them, but more importantly, to network them among themselves because they're not alone. And that in and of itself is very important to understand, but also to directly connect them to senior established leaders who are committed to the same values. The issue is we recognize we have a disastrous void in courage in society today. As C.S. Lewis said, courage is not simply one of the virtues, but the form of every virtue at the testing point. Therefore, in our Rising Leaders application, after the usual resume, the usual list of accomplishments, the usual personal references, we ask only one additional question. What have you done to show personal courage? Finally, from watching our growth to over 200 rising leaders in 2.5 years from the US, Switzerland, and other countries, I actually have a new small amount of optimism. We will succeed because there are so many exceptional young people who are committed to preserving these essential freedoms to ensure future opportunity and prosperity for everyone. So thank you all for attending this event, and we hope not just that you're interested, but we hope to provoke you tonight and tomorrow. Thank you very much. We have a great program, and it started tonight with a special guest speaker who I will introduce and who fought through a canceled plane from the East Coast of the United States to get here, which I'm very grateful for. Chad Wolf is the former acting secretary of the Department of Homeland Security under the first President Trump administration. In this position, he oversaw an annual budget of almost $50 billion, managed over 240,000 employees, including operating components and agencies that are part of the Armed Services of the United States, the U.S. Coast Guard. He is a nationally recognized expert in counterterrorism, law enforcement, transportation security, border security, immigration, and critical infrastructure. During his time at the Department of Homeland Security, he navigated numerous global and domestic challenges to the nation's security, not just through the pandemic, but in numerous border and immigration crises, natural disasters, and threats to aviation security. He is currently the Executive Director and Chief Strategy Officer, as well as Chair for the Center for Homeland Security and Immigration at the America First Policy Institute. In this role, Chad is responsible for day-to-day management and strategic direction of the Institute with a focus on setting policy goals and research priorities. Please welcome Chad Wolf, who will speak on security, immigration, and peace.
All right, how's everyone doing? Good? All right, how's everyone doing? Good? All right. Well, as Scott indicated, I'm about 20 hours into my trip from the East Coast of DC, so a little jet lagged, but I think I've got it in me. Let me first thank Global Liberty Institute, Scott, Anthony Curtis, and others for the invitation to be here. It's good to see so many young faces in the crowd. I speak to a variety of different groups from time to time, and there's usually a handful of young folks in the crowd. So it's good to see that you are the majority tonight. It's good to be here. Next year, the United States will celebrate her 250th birthday. We date that birth with the signing of the Declaration of Independence on July 4th, 1776. Curious parties sometimes observe that it's not a natural choice for a birthday. At the time of our declaration was signed, the outcome of our revolution against British rule was very much in doubt. America's birthday was not chosen to mark either a moment of final victory nor to commemorate the occasion of which the bloodshed began. Instead, it was chosen to mark the beginning of a revolutionary ethos, a government by, for, and of the people. America speaks more broadly, proudly, and patriotically today than it did under a previous administration. Our renewed patriotism doesn't necessarily necessitate mockery of other national traditions, but America First does have a message for Europe and the rest of the world, and that message is that you are not on your own. It is not that we have no interest in your affairs. Our concerns have always been intertwined, and they will remain so. In the spirit of shared values and shared history, we ask our friends and allies to embrace the basic principles enshrined in America's Declaration of Independence. And perhaps the most basic principle in that document is a simple idea with ancient European roots. In the very first sentence of that declaration, the founders used the term "one people" to describe those taking the audacious, perilous step of breaking with Great Britain. The idea of a nation, not as a proposition, but as a people with a very specific history and a specific set of shared values, goes back to Aristotle. Aristotle used the word philia, a type of love, to describe the bond that held a people together. That love is not imposed by a central government, does not rest with the whims of a sovereign. That love is born from common experiences, a common history, a common tongue, and a common faith. It is philia, or love, that undergirds the term "one people." This indispensable and foundational role of any government is the defense of one people. And as our declaration puts it, again, relying in no small part on the ideas born right here in Europe, it is the right of the people to demand that a government organize its powers in such a form as to them shall seem most likely to affect their both safety and happiness. So at the core of the America First movement is the simple idea that in the United States, our primary concern should be for the safety and happiness of our own people. America First does not mean America alone, however. It does not mean America indifferent to anyone in anything outside our borders. It means a return to the foundational principles of governance. To prioritize safety and happiness, to borrow the founders' phrase, is a simple idea. A nation is supposed to put its citizens first. There can be no security, there can be no flourishing if that nation does not first secure the liberties of its citizens and privilege those citizens over all others. These are the principles of America First. America First understands that the principles not only work on our shores, but they are foundational to the safety and happiness of other peoples as well. So under President Trump, America First means that we will encourage other nations, especially our old allies, to remember that their foundational commitments are to their citizens. The Trump administration understands that those nations committed to ensuring the safety and happiness of their own people are our natural partners. Far from being indifferent to the affairs of others, America First is eager to see our ancient friends return to joint civilization inheritance. That eagerness is not just a feeling, but a project. We know that there are many movements right here in Europe that share our same view of the proper role of government in guaranteeing security, order, and liberty. We wish them all well and provide any assistance and encouragement as we can. In 2025, we mark 80 years since the defeat of Nazism, a shared triumph of Europe and America. Yet instead of remembering the victory, as the defense of those nations and peoples, too many recently have invoked it to demand the opposite: the erosion of sovereignty, the opening of borders, the surrender of national life in the name of globalism. The defenders of the status quo use this 80th anniversary occasions to redouble their demands for unfettered mass migration. Motivated by fear and a little cynicism, as well as misplaced ideological conviction, these globalism partisans warn that the effort to give nations basic jurisdiction over their borders and their culture is nothing less than the horrors of the Third Reich. Now, I wish I was being a little hyperbolic. I think any honest observer here of late would argue and would concede that I am not. The Second World War was the most destructive conflict in human history, and in its aftermath, it was noble to do all that you could to ensure that such a catastrophe could never be repeated. To those who built and sustained the post-war consensus, avoiding a future cataclysm meant building strong, supranational institutions. More basically, it meant reimagining the state as simply a set of propositions rather than a nation made up of a people bound together by a shared culture. Over the decades, as European institutions became first centralized and then ossified, and as huge bureaucratic classes settled into comfortable certainties, it became increasingly unacceptable for anyone to suggest a return to nations as we once understood them. Instead, it became mandatory to declare that all differences between peoples are nothing more than unimportant accidents. You can change the population of France or Germany or the United Kingdom however you like without losing anything except prejudices. That's their contention. What matters now is not philia or that love among a particular people. What matters now, and what supposedly they will tell you guarantees security and peace, is a vague collection of universal ideas to which everyone will presumably and gladly assent to. To say otherwise, these bureaucrats declare, is not just bigoted, but actively dangerous. So over the decades, the obviously laudable desire to prevent another global war hardened into a set of presumptions not only about the nature of the state, but about how much criticism those presumptions could be expected to withstand. In recent years, we've seen governments across the continent crack down on dissident, especially on the subject of immigration. These crackdowns are invariably justified on the grounds of human rights. I think we've all heard that. Citizens who protest the transformation of their cities, of their countrysides, are told that they are unlawfully attempting to deprive these new arrivals of their sacred rights. There's no distinctions, they declare, between those who share a nation's ancient heritage and those that have just arrived, oftentimes from the other side of the globe. To question that assumption, or to point out that it contradicts several millennia of history, is to commit a crime worthy of imprisonment. And again, that's not being hyperbolic. 3.5 centuries ago, and some 750 kilometers north of where we stand today, the Treaty of Westphalia ended Europe's most destructive war by declaring a principle still vital today, and that's sovereignty. Nations were to govern themselves, guard their borders, and protect their people. That order preserved Europe's peace far better than any empire or any abstraction could ever could. Even in 1648, this was not an entirely novel concept. Rather, Westphalia codified a basic principle going back to Aristotle, that people are the foundation of a political community, and that community cannot be dissolved either to the ambitions of an empire or the abstractions of ideology. And if that particular community genuinely represents its people, then the defense of those borders, the defense of the basic right of self-definition, is fundamental to providing lasting security and enduring peace. The America First movement understands that there would be no America without Europe. Our nation was built on the political principles that emerged in the Greece of Socrates, the Roman Empire of St. Augustine, the Britain of John Locke. The great American experiment was and is unique. But even in its uniqueness, it has distinguished ancestors whom it honors. America First may be chiefly concerned with returning the United States to our founding principles, and it is, but there's not an unproductive impulse. It is not an expression of American chauvinism. We call upon the nations of Europe and all across the world from whom we've learned so much to consider this same return to their animating principles as well. And so I say nations of Europe rather than Europe. That's for a reason. Ireland and Italy are not interchangeable, nor are Germany and Greece. These may be names for modern nation states, but they also describe particular peoples with a particular history or a particular philia. These people deserve the right to sovereignty and to live in communities of ordered liberty. In the post-war world, the United States has an indispensable role in playing in guaranteeing security and that ordered liberty. As Western Europeans face the looming Soviet threat, as they rebuilt their economies and institutions, they looked to America. This role as freedom's guarantor was one that America took on gladly. Over time, temporary necessities hardened into enduring expectations and obligations that have increasingly served neither Americans nor Europeans. In recent years, thanks to the leadership of President Trump, there's been a significant reset of that transatlantic relationship. That reset is intended to put our relationship on a more equal footing. And I hope to inspire Europeans to return to the fundamental precepts of law and statecraft that first made them great. The America First principles that animate the Trump administration in the first term and now in the second put American interests first. Those ancient principles also can and should serve as inspiration for the nations here in Europe to once again embrace their own national interest, to which peace and security are foremost. Unfettered mass migration foisted on communities without their consent is antithetical to the idea of the national interest. A people who cannot protect their borders, who cannot decide who can enter, who can stay, ceases to be a people in the traditional political sense. A people who cannot decide what their nation is or who their nation is have become not citizens but subjects. They are subjects of an empire. Europe's seen many empires. I don't think we want to go there again. Let me finish with this. The America First message to Europe starts with a thank you. We owe so much to Europe. America First does not ask Europeans or anyone else around the world to become more like America. We ask you to become and consider to become more like yourselves. The message is simple. It's time for Europe to return to its nations, to its sovereignty, to its faith, to its gleaming heritage of law-ordered liberty. Only in that return lies greatness, and only in that return lies peace. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Excellent. Yeah. I think what we'll do now, we'll start a conversation, and then hopefully the audience will pick up one of the roving mics that we have and ask your own questions. I'd like to start it off with some questions really about immigration.
Yep.
Because immigration is national security, and you were quoted here in the Daily Mail. The ability to remove individuals or deport individuals is just a fundamental part of our immigration system, of any country's immigration system. The idea is that if folks come here illegally, they don't have a legal right to remain, they need to be removed. And this points out something that is a point of, I would say, obfuscation in the United States by the media, and that is President Trump's stand on immigration. It's an anti-illegal immigration. It's not an anti-immigrant move, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
No, I think it's a great point. I think when a lot of people talk about immigration, sometimes they unintentionally confuse what that term means. And I think other times, as you indicate, the media specifically confuses that term. What we usually talk about with border security and illegal immigration is the number of individuals coming into any country, but particularly the United States, illegally, not understanding who they are, not understanding where they're coming from, not understanding their backgrounds, and not really understanding who they are, versus the legal side of immigration. The fact still holds true. It did during Trump's first term. It did during 4 years of President Biden, and now it continues to hold true. Is the United States is the most welcoming country in the world. We give out roughly 1 million green cards a year. 1 million individuals a year can come into the United States and live because they've gone through the process, the citizenship process. The most welcoming country by far. But if you were to hear what I call the legacy media and others, they will tell you that President Trump and all that serve for him are bigoted. We hate immigrants. We hate people of color. On and on and on. And it's just not the case. You've got to understand who's coming into your country. As some of my remarks tonight were, to have sovereignty over your country, you need to understand who's coming in. And every country, not just the United States, every country should be able to determine who comes into their country and for what reason. It shouldn't just be, if you want to show up, guess what? You can come on in, because we've seen the product, or we've seen the result in Germany, in UK, Sweden, and other places here in Western Europe that I think those in the United States say, we don't really want to emulate that. That's not the model. And so, under 4 years of President Biden, which is the most recent, we had somewhere, depending on how you count it, between 12 and 18 million individuals come into the country illegally. The United States we're a big country, granted, but we can't sustain that. Our education systems can't sustain that. Our medical systems can't sustain that because all those individuals that come in don't have health care. And so when you and I get sick and we go to the doctor because we may have the flu or we may have something else, they'll go to an emergency room. And so what does that do to public health systems across the United States? So there's a lot of downstream effects of why mass illegal immigration is not good. And those on the left will just say, well, you should, we're here to help everyone. Well, I guess I would disagree. I would say if you're in the United States and you're president of the United States, your first and foremost obligation is to help American citizens. Full stop. And yes, you help those that need help that you can take in, but 12 to 18 million over a 4-year period is not that.
Mm-hmm. So you pointed out some of the practical issues, including simply the resources that are overwhelmed by having this level of illegal immigration. But there's another side of this, which again, the portrayal of this policy of securing a border against illegal immigration and even deporting people, criminal illegal immigrants or non-criminal, which I think is a totally separate topic. The real human rights issue that comes into play that the media in the US either ignores or distorts is this idea of hundreds of thousands of children being brought in, sex trafficking through these porous borders. So there's something like 250,000 lost children who President Trump, I think, is actively trying to figure out how to find and return. And I think recently we saw, I think it was Salvador, I forget what country, they said, yes, we want the children back. The parents were saying we want the children back. And the judge in the US blocked that deportation. And the reason I'm bringing it up is not just for the topic, but of course, Switzerland is the center of human rights organizations, particularly in Geneva. And of course, they're a leader in efforts against human trafficking. So I'm sort of wondering if you see, where is this going in the Trump administration, particularly given the barriers of our own court system to doing something that is a moral obligation, I would think.
Right.
And secondly, what do you see in terms of international cooperation for this sort of thing?
So I'll start high level. We would oftentimes in the Trump administration when I served, sort of ask ourselves some fundamental questions. Do we want to stop human trafficking? Do we want to stop child sex exploitation? Do we want to stop all these bad things that we know are occurring? We know them because our law enforcement officers are picking up, interviewing people, right? It became so prevalent because the cartels would smuggle, and what they would do to children is that any child under the age, well, starting around 9, particularly female, exclusively female, was given a pregnancy test because they were most likely abused and raped on that journey up. And so we said, let's stop this mass illegal immigration coming into the United States, and that will stop the trafficking, or at least curtail it to a certain extent. The Biden administration had a different view. They said, let's just help anyone and everyone that comes to our border. And so what we saw during, again, 4 years was over 500,000 children unaccompanied. No parent, no guardian, no aunt, no uncle, no mother, no father, no one. 500,000 come to our southern border. And so to give you a sense, my son goes to Penn State. That football stadium holds 100,000 people. You could fill up that stadium 5 times with just the number of children that came across the border in those 4 years. And we don't know where they are. So that's the
Right.
number that you were talking about. And so if you are fundamentally opposed to that, you don't want to see them traffic, you don't want to see them abused, well, then you put in strong border security controls so that the cartels and the traffickers and the smugglers know that they can't do that, know that it is going to be so prohibitively difficult to smuggle that they give up. They decide to go elsewhere. They decide to make money doing something else rather than trafficking kids. So that's kind of like a fundamental different philosophy that we had, which is if you want to stop, again, the smuggling of children or the smuggling of any humans, trafficking of any humans, then let's make sure that our laws don't have loopholes, which a lot of ours do in the US, and let's actually enforce border security. Enforcing the law is not bad. Some on the left and those in the media will say it's bad. How can you do that? How can ICE pick up someone on the streets of Chicago and deport them? Well, they don't have any legal right to be in the United States. They didn't come in legally. They came in illegally. Oftentimes, a lot of those folks get their due process in front of an immigration judge. They usually get 2 judges. They get an immigration court of appeals, and they go through their due process, and at every turn, a judge says, you have no legal right to be here. You don't qualify for any of the protections under US law, the biggest one being asylum. And you need to leave. And so we give them an order to leave. I would say 90% never leave, right? And so that's what you see today when you talk about a deportation plan, or the president talks about that. He's talking about going out and finding those individuals that have come here illegally, that have been told to leave the United States, that have chosen not to. Now, again, some of them have ulterior motives, and we can talk about the known or suspected terrorists that we've caught. A lot of those people just want a better life, and God bless each and every one of them. But I would contend that you got to come to the United States legally if you want that American dream. We have over 82 different visa programs, different ways that you can apply to come to live and to work in the United States. You just need to do it legally so we can vet you, so that we understand who you are, so that I think the Trump administration agrees that you're not going to be a public charge, meaning that you're not going to come into the United States and all of a sudden American taxpayers are going to have to pay for your housing and everything else. And so those are just some fundamental principles I think we have a difference of opinion on with others in the US.
Do you see that there is, what is your thought on the way it's going with international cooperation, both with receiving people back, and are you surprised that it's going as well or as poorly? I mean, I'm surprised it's sort of going as well as it's going. But
I think it is going well because I think, particularly you mentioned the children. I mean, a lot of these countries, particularly in Central and South America, we'll take El Salvador, 1/3 of their GDP is from remittances from the United States, right? Okay, they've got a budget issue they got to deal with there, but you see this brain drain leaving countries, right? All their youth are coming to the United States because if you can come illegally, why not? And so, there's something to be said that instead of having that huge influx into the United States, let's try to both stabilize, put some law and order into these countries, revitalize them, their economy, investment, make the investment more palatable so that the youth wants to stay, they want to work, they want to be a part of their community and their country. So I think a lot of the countries are accepting them back because a lot of these countries want things from the United States. This is the
negotiation.
This is the down and dirty of how it happens. It becomes very transactional, right? Guatemala needs more aid to do X, Y, and Z. Well, then they need to accept more of their nationals back, right? Mm-hmm. And that's just kind of how it works at the moment. And I think the Trump administration, the Biden team didn't do any of that. So if it's one thing that the Trump team is good at, that's making a deal.
Did this sort of thing happen in the time that you were there? Yeah. I mean, what was the status of illegal immigration pre-Joe Biden?
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't anywhere to the extent. We had a little bit of a spike in 2019, and I would say that we had. I'm trying to think about the numbers. It was a drop in the bucket, though, mm-hmm. right? You would see maybe 3,000, 4,000 people come across the border in a day. Under Biden at the height, 20,000 a day coming across.
And is your feeling this was? I mean, I think I know the answer, but is your feeling this was intentional by the Biden decision? And what is your feeling about why?
So the first part of that's a lot easier to answer than the second part. Yeah, I mean, I think President Biden, when he was a candidate, basically said we shouldn't be doing all these things that Trump, the first administration, did. So they stopped building any type of physical infrastructure to help our Border Patrol and our law enforcement agents do anything. They took down a lot of the agreements that we had in place. We had agreements that said, look, this idea of claiming asylum in the United States is a little different. Like most people, particularly in Europe and others, call them refugees, right? And that just happens to be because they're outside your border. But for the United States, if they show up at our southern border mainly, but also our northern border, we call them asylum seekers. They're refugees. It's one and the same, right? And so we have millions that come to that border seeking asylum, seeking refuge for any variety of reasons. But again, I always go back to the law. What are the protections under U.S. law that provide that? And very few people end up meeting those requirements, right? It's very specific. A lot of people say, well, I come from a bad country or a bad neighborhood, or I fear a gang in my neighborhood. Well, South Side of Chicago is not much better than any of that, right? But that doesn't mean you can seek asylum from Chicago, right? It just means you probably should move somewhere else and seek some safety. So, there's a lot going on the international side as well. We would have debates with multinational institutions, the UN, great example, and others that just say, United States, you're such a big country, you need to receive more and more and more. And finally, we say, well, how much? How much is enough, right? Because we stopped a period of time in the U.S. and they stopped it again, receiving refugees from overseas, because we receive millions of asylum seekers, which are also refugees. So it's a difficult situation in the U.S., and I think it's just been the norm for so long between Republican and Democrat presidents before Trump. No one really wanted to touch on this issue because it's a difficult issue. People are passionate about this and they get upset very, very quickly. President Trump, I think he cares about that, but doesn't really care, right? He just wants to do the right thing. And he says this process is broken and he's gone about fixing it. So you just look at the results now. I mean, when President Biden, I think he stood on on one of the debate stages with President Trump, he said, I've done everything I can do to stop illegal immigration. I've used every authority I have. I now need Congress to act. I mean, Congress has not acted in the first 7 months of the Trump administration, and there's almost zero illegal apprehensions along that southern border, right? It just tells you got to have the will. You got to have the ability to make really, really tough decisions, knowing that upwards of 45 to maybe 49% of people are going to be upset with you. But as long as you're doing it for the right reasons, you should do it.
Let me ask one more question, and then we'll take questions, hopefully from the audience. To me, I really can't figure out, maybe I haven't lost totally being naive from my government experience, but I'm sort of shocked still at the way the media portrays what's going on. And I don't know if it's exactly the same in places like the UK or Germany or Switzerland. But the media focuses on deporting illegal immigrants is, quote, separating families.
Yeah.
And as Kristi Noem and many others have pointed out, and the common sense is when anyone does a crime, commits a crime and they're arrested, that is separating families. And I think as President Trump has said, the children can go with the people that are being deported. Can you tell me how to understand this?
It's a tough issue. I mean, we would see a lot of individuals coming across the border because under U.S. law, if you have a child, it's easier for you to stay in the United States, right? Versus if you're just a single adult coming over and you're claiming asylum, we can put you into expedited removal. It's an easier way to deal with single adults. And so the traffickers, the cartel members, everyone's figured this out. So what do? They grab a child, right? And they'll come over and they say, well, I'm the parent. And they're trafficking that child for a number of reasons. And so we had to deal with this. So we started introducing rapid DNA. And it was funny because at first, the machines weren't even like, we got a couple of the machines out there and they started figuring out, oh, this isn't good. Like they're going to know I'm not. And a lot of our machines started to break. We didn't tell them. We would just grab the swab and start walking. They would be like, okay, I'm not the father. I'm not the mother.
Even though you had no machine functioning.
The machine was not functioning at all. The border's a little dicey place to get tech up and running. But, and so, yeah, I mean, it's a big problem. But the media, to your point, the media would be like, oh, you're separating families. And I would say, yes, we separate families every day at the border. I got people coming over that it may be their child, and the child has bruises all over them. Well, that's odd. Why does a 9-year-old girl have bruises and flinches every time someone walks? Because she's been abused by her father, right? We will separate them immediately.
And you have enough personnel to do that sort of thing where you at
yeah.
the border?
We have trained law enforcement officers that are looking
so
for
they're
that
assessing these people individually.
Individually. And so then the media will say, okay, well, that's okay. You can separate them for that, but not for anything else. I mean, I can give you 12 other reasons, good reasons on why you want to separate. And to your point, if you're in the United States and you have let's say you have 3 children, you go out and rob a bank and you get caught, guess what? Your children don't go to jail with you, right? So you're separating yourself from your family because you're choosing to commit a criminal act, an illegal act. And so a lot of people can't get their mind around that. But then I'll end on this. To your point, the Trump administration said they wanted to remove I think it was about 12 children back to Guatemala that had been trafficked into the United States. The Guatemalans said, yes, we want our children back. Our NGOs here in the United States filed suit and said, you can't send them back. So the same NGO said you can't separate families, but yet all the children said our parents are back in Guatemala. The Guatemalan government says, I want my children back.
Right.
And a judge said you can't send them back. So either we're keeping families together or we're not. Like, it's confusing to me.
Yes, it is. Okay, are there any questions? We have a couple of microphones.
Thanks very much. Josh Rauh. Thanks, Chad, for the great talk. So as you outlined, the Trump administration has made great strides in addressing illegal immigration and doing so basically without Congress, or completely without Congress. I was wondering what potential you think there is, from your experience in the first Trump administration, and also looking at the situation now, to improve the situation with legal immigration, probably without Congress, because you need 60 votes in the Senate to do anything except for maybe pass a budget. And in particular, 2 things. Number one, the abuse of the H-1B visa program, and number 2, just the fact that our legal immigration system is so heavily based on family immigration and less on skills immigration. And it's something that kind of economists who I know, particularly our party colleague Eddie Lazier, spoke about for many years. How can the immigration system in the U.S. be shifted more towards a skills-based system?
Yeah. It's a good point. We often call that merit-based, right? How do you get to an immigration system, and I talked about this earlier, making sure that you're bringing in individuals that the country wants and needs, right? Whether that's a skill set, whatever it might be, every country across the world should be able to pick and choose who they want. That's a fundamental right of that country, of their sovereignty. Our immigration system today, to your point, is not built that way, right? It's, I mean, we've got a number of different ways. One is a lottery, literally a lottery system. You enter in the lottery and hopefully you get a visa. I'm not sure how that benefits the United States. Some would argue, well, it makes you more diverse. The United States is pretty diverse as it is. I'm not sure that, assigning 70,000 more visas to random lottery people is really going to help that. We give visas out to underserved countries. So countries that maybe don't have a lot of people coming over in visas, we give them even more visas. Again, I'm not sure how that serves the interest of the United States. And so this idea of let's go to a merit-based system, let's make sure that we're bringing in those, whether they're high-skilled workers, maybe they're low-skilled workers, whatever the U.S. economy needs, that's what the U.S. immigration system should reflect, and that's how we should be doing it. The problem is you got Congress, to your point, and Congress usually fouls up most things in the United States. And so our immigration laws haven't changed in over 20 years. And so they are built for a different time, a different U.S. economy than they are today. Whether it's H-1Bs, H-2Bs, H-2As, whatever it is, it's all broken. And there's not, in some cases there's too many, in other cases there's not enough. So I think what the Trump team is doing now is that they're going to try to do everything they can within their executive power, within the boundaries and the confines of the law itself. On the legal side, that's very, very little. On the illegal side, it's a lot, which we've seen them do a lot. So unfortunately, I do think it's going to take Congress. I don't think, I'd be surprised if the Trump team did anything on legal immigration before the midterms. That's not what they were elected on. It's not what the American people told them to do. The American people told President Trump, and some would argue immigration was one of 3 issues he got elected on. They told him to close the border and secure their communities, stop the fentanyl from coming into the United States. And that's what he should do. So that's probably what, again, I'm just predicting, that's probably what the team's going to do at the White House between now and the midterms. But if they try to get all these things that President Trump's done by executive order, if they try to get that enshrined into law, right? If they go to Congress and say, okay, these changes that we've done under our own authority, we like them to be law because we don't really want to go back to the way it was. I think then it becomes a negotiation with the legal side as well, right? Because then you got members of Congress saying, well, I need more agricultural workers in Texas, or I need more seasonal workers in Alaska and Maine and elsewhere. So then, the trading and the compromising of legislation begins.
Mm-hmm. Because as we know, and people that don't know the United States, there's been so much accumulation of power by the executive, one could say out of necessity, that a lot of things are done by executive order, and then the next president reverses all the executive orders. And this has literally been done now, several administrations in a row. Next question. There's a microphone somewhere.
Hi, Amber Todoroff with Open the Books. So you talked a little bit about nonprofits and how they have been sort of supporting this illegal immigration or like semi-legal immigration. How have you seen Trump's actions against nonprofits impact illegal immigration? And also, how have you perceived maybe Europe copying this idea or anything like that?
Well, it's a good question. Let me just start, not all nonprofits are the same, right? So there are some that truly just want to help individuals that come to the United States that don't have much and are just there to help. Other nonprofits, which I refer to, actually facilitate, will send their attorneys south of the border to say, here's what you need to say when you come across an immigration official. Say these 4 words, whether you believe them or not, and they have to let you go into the interior of the United States. So those are kind of the NGOs that I'm referring to. And I think the biggest thing that Trump has done, if I go back to what's the biggest thing that President Biden did, well, he gave them a lot of money, right? These organizations need money in order to do what they do, to facilitate, to hire people, to hire staff, to do all that. And so under 4 years, they received any number, millions, I would say almost billions of dollars of US taxpayer dollars through grants to do that. And
much of it, if I may interrupt, went to the salaries of the people rather than the mission of the organization.
It's to pay, their executives as well. The Trump administration cut that off almost on day one. So a lot of these groups are actually struggling now because they've had to lay off staff. They don't have the ability to do It takes money to do this. They don't have the ability to do that any longer. A lot of them, a lot of the NGOs say, well, we're privately funded. Yes, but it's like a very small portion of their operating budget. Their operating budget comes from the United States government. And the Trump team said, look, we're not doing this anymore. The American taxpayer, I'm not giving taxpayer money to a group that then facilitates the illegal entry of individuals into the country. It seems kind of like basic sense. But for years and years and years, it just didn't happen.
Yeah, I'd like to quote Thatcher, who famously said, there's no such thing as public money. There's only taxpayer money.
Right.
And I think our governments, all of them, they think it's their money. I think there's a fundamental difference between sort of what I would call conservatives and American political liberals. Yes.
Hey, well, good evening. Thank you for being here and for speaking, and thanks for both of your service to the country. My name is Christopher Phillips. I am an American. I am specifically from Southern California, and of course, we've seen a lot of action in the last several months regarding immigration enforcement in that region. Being from there, I feel like I understand the culture pretty well, and there's a lot of resentment, and this is pretty clear, I think, just in the coverage to immigration enforcement in that region. There's aphilia, as you mentioned, felt, but it's different, of course, to the one that perhaps we and other Americans share. And so my question is, I'm wondering what ideas are coming out of America First Policy Institute and just the general sphere and the administration to win hearts and minds, to change the feelings and the sentiments of those people and get all regions of the country behind the mission of enforcing immigration law.
Yeah, I mean, what I would say is enforcing the law is tough. Regardless of whether it's immigration law or any other part of the law, it's tough, and that's what we're seeing today. But look, I think for the most part, the American people, it depends on the poll that you would maybe pull up, are still behind President Trump on this issue. And if you look at the last election, and President Trump did better than he's ever have than any Republican presidential candidate with Hispanics. He overturned multiple counties along the Rio Grande Valley in South Texas. And some would say, well, those are Hispanics. They would hate cracking down on immigration. No. The people that live down there are Hispanic Americans that came across legally and are pissed off. They're pissed off that people are coming into their communities illegally and taking jobs and a variety of other things. So, look, I get, particularly in Southern California, your governor is interesting. It's a different mindset there. Like, I get it. I mean, it's different than Texas. California, very, very different. What I would say is you don't see that resentment across the country, because in normal states, you actually have law enforcement working with law enforcement, right? And so if ICE, for instance, if an illegal alien commits a crime in Dallas, probably not a good example. Houston isn't either. They're all blue mayors. Commits a crime in another city, and they're in jail. They'll call up ICE to come into the jail, pick them up, to remove them out. Right? No one knows what's going on. All happens in a jail setting. You never. Right? What does Chicago, LA, New York, what do they all do? They don't do that. They say, you can't come into our jail. You federal law enforcement officer cannot come into our jail. In fact, we're just going to let them go. And so then ICE has to go out into the community, which we saw in LA and elsewhere, right? And so you see all these, crazy scenes of ICE officers, and they're in their tactical gear, right? And they're going into communities, because those communities have said you can't come into our jail and pick up illegal aliens that have committed a crime in those communities. It's crazy. So it's actually, mayor of Chicago, mayor of New York, mayor of LA, mayor of Denver, it's actually the reverse. If they wanted less ICE officers in their community, they'd just let them come into the jail and pick them up and leave. By saying you can't do that, they're actually saying, I need 10,000 ICE officers in my community, right? Because now, instead of picking up that one individual that may have been in jail, that individual gets released, right? They go back to home, apartment, wherever they go. For that one individual, DHS now has to assign upwards to 10 ICE officers to go in to that community to pick him or her up, right? And so you just multiply that on and on and on. So, you know, a little bit of this is politics. I get your point. I'll try to end on this, on the hearts and minds piece. I think a lot of people are saying, well, why are you kicking these people out, right? And then there's two classes, which Scott, I think you mentioned earlier. They're the criminals. I think a lot of Americans would say, yeah, kick the criminals out. We don't want criminals here. Although some would argue what is a crime and what is not. That's a different debate. And then there's others that say, well, there's a group of individuals that have committed no crime and that have been here for 10 years. Why are you removing them? Here's my response to that, and I appreciate people can disagree with this. My response is they came into the country illegally, and if you excuse that behavior, and you take a whole class of individuals off of enforcement, and you just say, if you come to the United States illegally, but you don't commit a crime, you're good. Guess what? Influx, millions and millions of individuals will start coming to the United States in the belief that if they come across illegally and they don't commit a crime, they won't be deported. And I think that's a very dangerous precedent to set. I think I could probably look around Western Europe and say that's not a good precedent.
There's another argument made for people who are not in the US, and this is done by the sort of what I would call the political left, and I find it shocking, morally repulsive, as they say, we want illegal immigrants. We don't want to force people who came in illegally out because we need them to mow our lawns. We need them to wash our dishes in restaurants. We need them to busboy the tables. And I don't know. I mean, I'm not even sure how to articulate this, but I find it offensive, incredibly offensive, that we want people that are willing to work for pennies.
But if you also just look at the data doesn't really suggest that.
It doesn't
right?
even validate.
Right? Because they'll say, well, we need these people. You actually have people, which is, I would say this is completely racist. On the left, they'll say, well, we need them to pick our food.
Yeah.
Right? And you're saying, well, we have an H-2A, which is a visa program for agricultural workers. It's uncapped. We have over 400,000 people on an H-2A visa in the United States today. We could go another 400,000. They just have to apply and come in the right way. It's uncapped. There's no limit to the amount of those types of visas that we can. They don't want to do that, right? Because that takes time, it takes effort, it takes money. You actually have to be vetted. Maybe I did something that they won't, if I can just come in illegally and in 30 days get a work permit, well, that's what I'm going to do, right? So until you close that avenue off and make them go through the legal avenues, it's not going to get better, but I share your frustration.
Yeah. By the way, these statements are made by elected officials, not just people on the street. It's really shocking to me. Yes.
Hello, Tim Rosenberger. I'm interested in knowing a bit about our relationship with Canada. The left-wing Canadian government has said that they want to have 100 million Canadians by 2100. That's more than doubling the number of people up there. It seems like in order to get there, they're not vetting particularly well. And it seems like a lot of the people coming in are much more interested in being in America than being Canadians. I'm wondering how AFPI is thinking about this long term, our expansive, largely unprotected border with Canadians. How do we think about either encouraging them to have a more sensible policy or changing the relationship with Canada, which has long been sort of, barely a different country?
Can I add a question to that, which is, I think it's difficult to understand, but the media has sort of portrayed it as all the drugs come through the southern border and the Canadian border is just our friendly neighbors to the north. And what is that?
Oh, so I was in Ottawa earlier this year and was talking to a conservative group. I started the talk off with a joke, which did not go very well, about the 51st state. Don't do that in front of Canadians. But their concern was much of to your concern, and they were saying, look, the Canadian government wants to bring in more and more individuals, and we have nowhere to house them, right? The strain I talked a little bit earlier. Not only like do they assimilate, do they share our same values, which I talked about, are they going to do that, but what does the housing and the education and the healthcare, what does it do to all these different elements? And at least the conservatives that I was talking to in Canada, they were like, this is like our number one issue. I'm not sure how it's going to play out. I think from a security standpoint, Yeah, I mean, the Canadian border is twice as big as the U.S.-Mexico border. It's about 4,000 miles. There's less agents, there's less technology, there's less drones, there's less everything up there, so it's more porous. Now, the good thing is the Canadian government, in theory, is a lot better partner than the Mexican government as far as letting people they let into their country, right? You can fly into Mexico, so you can fly into Tijuana with no visa from South America, none whatsoever, right? And be at the border in about an hour. And so we see that. So it's a little bit more difficult to do that in Canada, at least right now. We'll see what kind of changes they make. So that has always given the U.S. some level of, I'm not going to say comfort, but it's a different type of at least security threat. If you look at the intel, which I haven't looked at now in 6 years, but when I did look at the intel, and you would see kind of the people that you pick up coming across the northern border, mainly drug runners, people of that, versus who you're picking up coming across the southern border, which are cartel members, but also very bad, other bad individuals that are coming to the United States to do something far different. And so you have to make a threat assessment, and you have to divide, and you have to allocate your resources accordingly. But I think it's a conversation that the U.S. government, Trump team, and others continue to have with the Canadians. And we saw this earlier, right? I mean, President Trump, I'm sure you'll talk tomorrow about tariffs, hit both Mexico and Canada, very high tariffs initially at the beginning of his term because of the fentanyl issue, because of mass illegal immigration. So he understands it, and he wants them to do more, just like he wants Europe to do more from a security perspective. He wants our neighbors in our hemisphere to do more, and is willing to push them.
Thomas Meyer, I'm a German economist. Thank you very much for a very inspiring talk, despite the jet lag. I want to switch a bit the perspective to Europe. In Europe, you don't have to cross the border illegally. You can just say the code word asylum.
Yep.
And then you enter legally, and then you may go on staying illegally. So my question to you, from your perspective, would it help if we would redefine the concept of asylum? This was one of the quote-unquote institutions after World War II that Scott talked about at the beginning, which was established for an entirely different purpose. Correct. It was established to safeguard against another situation similar to that we saw in Nazi Germany, there where refugees, true refugees, political refugees, needed protection. This concept has lived on unchanged. From your point of view, would it help to redefine it legally, to define what asylum is all about, so that not everybody all across the world can quote this word and get protection?
Absolutely. And it's what we've done in the United States, at least specifically under President Trump. Folks historically had come to the border saying, I'm seeking asylum. Let's say you're from Honduras. You say, I'm seeking asylum from Honduras. It's a very dangerous country, although that's not quite true. There's portions that are dangerous. And so what the Trump team started to do is to get very specific. And so we started actually looking at neighborhoods inside these countries, at their crime rate, and say, well, where do you live? Oh, I live, it's actually a better, you have a lower crime rate than Chicago does. What are you seeking asylum from? Well, I meant, where I used to live, right? And so, there are elements of a lot of countries that are very dangerous, including the United States. But that doesn't mean that the only place that you can seek asylum is the United States, right? We talk about forum shopping, which I believe occurs here in Europe and the EU as well, which is this whole idea, if you are seeking refuge, if you're seeking asylum, because wherever your home country is either dangerous, it's in the middle of a civil war, something's happened there. The international norm is that you seek asylum or refuge as close to your home country as possible, because the idea here is that when conditions improve, you go back home. Instead, what we see at the United States is we see people walking through 22 different countries, all of which they could seek asylum in, to come to the United States because their home country, 22 countries away, is so dangerous. And so we've said, which I think the EU should say, Western Europe should say, is I'm calling your bluff. which is there are other countries in the world. For us, the United States is not the only place that provides that asylum or that protection. There are countries all over the world, and it shouldn't just be up to one country or one group of countries to do that. But yeah, absolutely. You've got to reform the asylum system. You know, I was in Hungary recently. They take a different view. I mean, they're part of the EU, but they just, you know, they won't accept them. You know, they get hit, I think it's like $1 million a day by the EU to say, okay, if you don't accept them, you're going to get a bill. They're not paying that. I'm not sure what's going on, but they're just saying that's just, we built that into our budget because we don't accept this notion that we've got to take hundreds of thousands of North Africans and others that come into our country just because we should. Like, it goes back to that philia, it goes back to that common purpose, that heritage that you have as a country, as a nation, as a sovereign nation. And the leadership of that nation has said, I want to choose who comes into our country and who doesn't. And they've got, obviously, challenges being part of a larger.
But has that actually been codified in law in the United States, or is that just a feeling or an order or a sort of pressure to enforce?
Yeah, so the Trump administration, the law needs to be changed in the United States, which it has not. But there's a number of things that you can do within the executive branch and the authorities. And I'll give you just an example, right? You would see that people come across the southern border of the United States, and some of them will actually just tell you why they're coming. They're like, I want a job. Well, that's great, but you can't come over illegally for a job, right? So we could send you back pretty quickly. Under the Biden administration and others, the very first question, instead of hi, hello, are you hurt, was, are you seeking asylum? Well, just that mindset says, well, if I ask you that question, I'm going to get a certain response back, right? So the Trump team said, we're not asking that question anymore. They actually have to affirmatively declare that they are seeking asylum, right? And so it's little changes like that that help kind of draw out the people that really do. Now, there are some people that actually do need those protections under U.S. law and probably do need them here, bless you, in Europe. But very few, very, very few actually need that. And they need to affirmatively declare that. They need to actually go out of their way. Because if you ask everyone, you're going to get the same answer.
Yeah.
And so there are little things that without changes in the law that you can do.
Hi, good evening. My name is Lukas Dressel. I'm from Germany. My question is, what's the better argument for your case and for a bigger goal? Fundamental rights, aka human rights, or the will of the people? Thank you.
Ooh, that's a good one. Look, as it relates to immigration, I would say, and again, people in the United States, people in Europe probably differ on this. I would say that enforcing your laws is actually a human rights issue, right? Is that I would argue that the Trump team in the first administration and now in the second administration are saving lives because they are actually telling people you can't come across that border illegally, right? Because every individual that comes across the southern border is trafficked. They have to pay a cartel member anywhere between $10,000 and $50,000 to come across that border, right? And so God only knows what happens to them during that. So if we're really talking about human rights, we're talking about protecting people and we want them to be safe, then we actually we stop that illegal activity and we funnel them into legal ways to come into the United States in legal avenues. But probably the one that I often talk about a lot is that 90% of individuals in the United States that claim asylum will never qualify for it. And I think of that 90%, 80% know that. They know that. But what they also know is that if you go in the United States and you claim that and you get released and your court date is not for 6 years, and they hope that the government kind of loses interest or they go off and does it, nothing ever happens there. And so I don't think that that's fair to people when you talk about human rights. I don't think allowing people to come into the country, start to build a life, only then to remove them 7 years later, that's nowhere to live, right? Let's be honest with them. You can only come in for these specific reasons, and if you try to come in illegally, we're going to remove you back. I think that is being very honest with people, and I think that's saving lives in the process.
Hi, thank you for being here. My name is Mackenzie. I'm a PhD student. I would love to hear your perspective on birthright citizenship,
Sure.
particularly the child of an illegal alien.
Yep.
And what you think subject to the jurisdiction thereof means, if you would argue from the perspective of what you think the founders imagined. And as a follow-up, I'd be curious, do you think an immigration moratorium is desirable until these mass deportations are put into effect, and the feasibility of that? Thank you.
Yeah, let me take your second question first. It's a tough one. The question was, should we stop any and all, I assume the question is legal immigration into the United States until you're able to remove any number of individuals that are here illegally? I think the answer is no, in my opinion. I don't think that a moratorium, but you do need to look at levels of immigration. And some would say, oh my God, how could you say that? Because, again, when you let in somewhere between 12 and 18 million individuals into your country, you're only going to start to understand the effects of that years later. And we are years later now, and we're starting to understand that. And so you're still I still think it's good to funnel individuals that want to come to the United States for business, for pleasure, whatever it might be, into legal channels so that we understand who they are. So I would still advocate for some legal immigration. Now, President Trump, I think in about like maybe 2 weeks ago, made a comment that a lot of Republicans didn't like when he said, 600,000 Chinese students, that's okay with me. And people were like, that's crazy. Folks on the right they're like, why do we need 600,000 students coming in? Don't they take, places of U.S. Children going to college? So there's always going to be that debate on the birthright citizenship question. Here's where I come down on that. I think that ruling, 200 years ago, was in a very different time, in a very different place. And I think if it were to get relooked at the Supreme Court, we'd get a very different result. Because I think anytime that you see the abuse of something like birthright citizenship, where you literally have people coming in, we see it, we see it on the border all the time. I've got to get to the United States so, I can have my daughter or my son or whatever it might be. Well, why is that? Why, you have no job, it becomes a burden on the American people. Why is that a good thing for the American people? Again, I come back to that America First approach, which is the laws of the United States should be to benefit Americans, first and foremost. Yes, should we help those that are less fortunate and vulnerable? Absolutely. But how does birthright citizenship help the way in which it has been interpreted and is interpreted today and administered today? How is that in the benefit of the United States? I don't see it. I don't see it specifically as it relates to your question.
In most countries, I think it's exceptional to have a country where if you're born in the country, you're automatically a citizen. I'm not sure what the numbers are on that.
There are some that have that. It's also exceptional, like, try to go walk across the border anywhere and probably get arrested. Not in the United States. They'll just let, anyway. So there's a lot of differences.
But this is a whole industry. I mean, I know people who have homes, who have late pregnancy friends or people from their original home country come just to have the baby at a place like Stanford, where I work, and the babies are automatically citizens. This is a whole industry. It's an intentional. It's not, somebody accidentally happens to be 9 months pregnant.
And so the debate right now, which she's very clever, she brought up, subject to the jurisdiction thereof, is if you're not a citizen, then you're not subject to the jurisdiction of the United States. So one would argue, I think the Trump administration is arguing, that birthright no longer applies to you. And so there's, again, that'll make its way through the courts. It is. I think it was good that they tested that because we'll see what the Supreme Court says.
Right.
Again, that ruling was a long time ago in a very different world for a very different purpose.
I think we have one more question.
Great to hear that your son's a Penn State grad. I'm a Nittany Lion myself.
There you go.
My brother and I both grew
He's
up
not
in
a grad.
college.
He's first year there.
Oh, even better, freshman year. I work in defense technology. I'm a venture capitalist. Before that, worked at SpaceX and a couple other places. My question to you is, there's a lot of social debate on title authorities and the technology that multiple different government agencies can use domestically, but also for foreign intelligence gathering as well. So my question is, post 9/11, the use of NRO images in the homeland was debated and then wasn't allowed. Question today with Palantir, AI, and a bunch of these other different types of technology to provide more concrete situational awareness and intel. There's a fine line. What is your thoughts as we see technology scaling and the use for CBP, and ICE and other DHS agencies?
Yeah, look, I think law enforcement always is going to have to embrace technology, particularly when you talk about AI and others. Now, post 9/11, 9/11 Act, Patriot Act, and other things, I think over time, there will be some on the right that say, look, that we've gone too far, at least in the United States, of using those types of authorities, which were really designed to keep, in part designed to keep bad people out of the United States, and really using that the full weight of the United States government, its intelligence capabilities and others. Let's really focus on the threats coming into the United States. I think when you get here domestically, and we've got others here probably that are more of an expert than I am, that becomes more problematic. And I think there is a fine line, and I think it's part of it is, what is the American people, what are they going to put up with, in a sense, right? What will they allow to live free? What will they allow to live in peace? And there's always going to be that debate of how much do you give to law enforcement? Do you give to those that keep you safe in the United States? So that being said, I think just as the bad guys, whether it's internationally or in the US, continue to adapt, continue to innovate, continue to use technology, I think Border Patrol, ICE, and others have got to use AI, have got to use, and we do, our Homeland Security investigations, which is an element of ICE, which just looks at human trafficking. We have agents that sit on the dark web all day, every day, and they're using algorithms and other things to detect a lot of the trafficking that goes on the dark web and how it's coming into the United States. So we're already using a lot of that technology, but as it relates to wiretaps, and that's a whole nother element in the US, that you got to be a little bit more careful about.
Okay, I think in the interest of food, we'll stop. Thank you very much.
All right, thanks.
It was great. Thank you. Really good.